It's Reija, and it's time for another Top 5 Wednesday. This week's topic is our favorite LGBTQ plus reads. I have to say that I thought that I would have a lot more LGBTQ plus reads than I actually have, because there was a time when I actually read almost nothing but queer lit, because that was something that I was really interested in, being queer myself. But yeah, it turns out that I have some gaps in my education, so I think I will definitely need to go and look up more recommendations for queer lit in the future. But I still have a few books that I want to talk about, so let's just get started. First up on my list is Sword's Point by Ellen Kushner. Now, who is surprised? I will continue screaming into the void for everyone to read this book until everyone has done so, because it is probably my favorite book ever. I probably need to go and reread it because it's been a while, but this book is everything to me. It has really morally ambiguous characters. It allows its main characters to be defined by more than what their sexual orientation is. They are very interesting, they have flaws, they have motivations, they have a love for each other, and I love this book and I love the sequels, I love the world. This is just a marvelous read, and everyone should read it. Next up on my list is Corambis by Sarah Monette, and this is the final book in the Doctrine of Labyrinth series. Now, the reason I put the final book on my list is because the other books are very hard to read, in a sense that they're not very happy, and horrible things happen to people, and the characters are sometimes less than morally desirable. Corambis is a very satisfactory culmination of all of the main characters' arcs. It has a very bittersweet ending, and I thought that it was a very appropriate way for the characters to end, given how they started. And it is one of the better LGBTQ reads that I have ever read, and I definitely would recommend the whole series for everyone. This book is one of my all-time faves as well. Third up on my list is Brokeback Mountain by Annie Proulx. Now, this is on my list mostly because it is a classic, not necessarily because it is the best ever book. I mean, I have read more engaging LGBTQ reads in my life than this book, but I just think that this is something that everyone should read. It is a very quick read. It talks about such an important time in the history of queer representation and such, and how hard it was to be gay in a time when nobody was accepting you, and even though the end is kind of tragic, the end is tragic, I think that this is definitely a book that should be on everyone's reading list. Fourth up on my list is Troll, a Love Story by Johanna Sinisalo. And I had to put this in here because Finnish representation and Finnish queer representation. And this is another book that I like because the main character is more than the sum of his parts. He is a really engaging character. He has a ton of flaws, and once again, his sexuality does not define him. His sexuality is just an aspect of him, which is something that I find most engaging and most interesting when I read LGBTQ lit, because I tend to go by the credo of my sexual orientation is not the most interesting thing about me. So that's why I tend to focus on books that don't stereotype sexual minorities, and that's why almost all the books on this list are books that manage to subvert the expected tropes that I see happening when people talk about LGBTQ representation in general. And finally, my fifth pick is actually a comic, and it may be a little controversial because it is a yaoi comic. And yaoi comics are generally done by straight women for straight women, and they are basically a safe way to straight women to engage in different kind of fetishes and fantasies because they can project themselves onto the subjugated male character. And there is a very definite feminine versus masculine role play in these types of, in this genre. But that said, Three Wolves Mountain, which I have in Japanese and in English, I think manages to be a really engaging read from an LGBTQ perspective. Because, first of all, there's actually a consensual romance in this. Like, usually when I'm thinking about yaoi, it's almost always non-consensual and it's someone forcing themselves onto another person. But this book does not have it. There's a romance between two consenting adults and they have characters outside their sexual preferences and their sexual urges, which is great. And the world building and the other characters in this story are engaging as well. The story is about a gravekeeper who comes across these two brothers who are from an old werewolf clan. They have run away from home and he starts to take care of them and ends up falling in love with the younger brother. And this has been one of my favorite yaoi mangas since forever, and I recently reread it. It's still my favorite, but for different reasons now, because I am looking for those not so savory aspects of yaoi, and this book manages to subvert those, and I'm so glad now Nobora is among us because she just makes this genre worth reading. But yeah, I definitely recommend Three Wolves Mountain. Have to say though, it is R-rated, so that's something to take into consideration if you do end up looking for it. And it is and in the US it is published by BL Sublime. They have the English translation of this. So those have been my picks for this week's Top 5 Wednesday. Let me know in the comments what you thought and what your picks would be and what your recommendations for best LGBTQ plus reads would be. And I will see you in my next video. Bye!